Hello and welcome everyone to CIPR International's webinar today on breaking barriers, the power of intercultural dialogue in shaping inclusive narratives. I'm Anjali Patil. I'm the EDI champion for the CIPR International Group, and it is my great pleasure to welcome our three panelists here today. I'm really excited, not simply because these three women have done so much in the field of EDI already and continue to do so, but especially because when we first thought about this webinar, we were trying to get speakers from different parts of the world. And I'm very pleased to say that we've got three from three different continents today. So a truly multicultural panel. And I'm really looking forward to the discussion that we will have. I think that we have a lot of discussion points, and it promises to be very interesting. So I don't want to take up too much time in giving an introduction, but I would like to introduce our eminent panelists. And let me first begin by welcoming Avril Lee, who is a senior healthcare communications practitioner, and she has held global and regional roles both in agency and in-house. She's partnered leading healthcare companies and led integrated creative and policy health campaigns across multiple markets, reaching the full spectrum of health stakeholders. Avril is currently the chair of CIPR's Diversity and Inclusion Network, and she has been an active campaigner for better representation in communications for over a decade and a half. She's also a member of the DEI Advisory Board of Our Future Health, as well as a trustee of the Doctors of the Work UK. And welcome, Avril. And Avril is joining us today from London. Next, we have Marie-Noëlle Elissac-Foy. She's the founder and director of The Talent Factory, a public relations boutique agency providing services in strategic public relations, media relations, and stakeholder management, and she joins us from Mauritius. Marie-Noëlle has successfully transitioned from a long career in the local media to the public relations industry. She's an established professional with over 25 years of experience and advises business owners and executives on different aspects of PR, reputation management, and stakeholder engagement. In 2020, she became the first Mauritian to be awarded the CIPR, the Chartered Practitioner from CIPR, and she currently sits on the content editorial board of CIPR's Influence magazine. Marie-Noëlle is a regular spokesperson on women empowerment, the fight against gender-based violence, leadership, and a staunch advocate for greater recognition of Mauritian SMEs. Like I said, she joins us from Mauritius. And next we have ML, or Mahalakshmi D'Souza. She's the CEO of APAC for Indicia worldwide. She joins us from Singapore. Let me say that first. She describes herself as a working parent, a CFO turned CEO, and a keen learner. With over 24 years experience across media, advertising, and marketing in Asia Pacific, ML has consistently driven business growth. Individually and in her professional capacity, she strives to champion sustainable business development that is inclusive and engaging with her teams. Leading with a hashtag always be learning mantra. She says she believes that be the change you want to see in the world, and she's always the one who aims to adhere to that one. So a very warm welcome to all three of you. And as we begin our webinar, what I'd like to do is start by getting to know all of you better, for me as well as for our listeners today. So the question is, tell us a little bit about your cultural background and how that has shaped your worldview, as well as what that helps you bring to the profession of communications as you've practiced it all these decades. So perhaps we could start with Avril.
Hello, everybody. I'm really delighted to be here today. Who am I? Well, I'm firstly and foremost a Londoner, which says something about how multicultural I am. I think anybody who's been to London. I was born and bred, I say, in London, but actually I'm Irish Chinese, based on genetics. And in my family, we're very diverse. So I'm the Irish Chinese one, but we also have Irish Nigerians, Irish Bajans, Irish Polish, and even Irish English. And my family were working class, and I was the first one in my family to go to university. So that has really shaped my worldview in terms of how I see the world. And for me, I'm used to differences. And I always think it's odd not to be different. It's sort of what my family is and how I always felt when I walked into a room. So I always saw the value of being multicultural and the joy that brought, and the different perspectives, and how interesting it was. And like I say, being brought up in London, that's just part of your daily life. It's just seeing that mix and what it brings to London and the innovation. And in terms of my professional life, I think two main things I think it's done is, well, firstly, I turned up and thought, where is everybody? Because the PR industry didn't reflect the people I'd seen at school, on the streets, at university. So that started my campaigning for a more diverse industry, which was about 15 years ago, when nobody was talking about it. And the other part of my work is, having done most of my work in global or regional programs, actually you realize that global means lots of different types of local, rather than there is a global way. And so flexibility and adaptability is really important to really enable people at a local level to use the materials and the content you're producing. And also sensitivity in some areas. So, you know, I've worked in HIV, that's culturally very sensitive in some countries compared to others, or contraception. Again, very different views depending on what market you're in. So I've always been very glad to be different and very glad to have a diverse background. I think it's really helped me in my life and in my profession.
Thank you, Avril. I really like the way you said global is really a different kinds of small locals. That's really an interesting way to put it. And with that, over to Mahalakshmi. You come from a part of the world where I think we have so many countries, and it's really a mosaic of cultures, each one very different in Asia. So perhaps over to you with the same question to introduce yourself and your worldview.
Perfect. First of all, thank you, Anjali. Very kind words of introduction. I'm just honored to be here and sharing the panel with really two esteemed panelists. So again, the question you ask about the cultural background and how it influences our perspective and the way we approach our work is a really good one, because if I take a step back and think about cultural background, it is so layered and evolutionary, and a lot of it you kind of reflect on it in hindsight. And I was just listening to Avril kind of talk about it and how it's shaped by your collective experiences, right? For me, born and raised in cosmopolitan Mumbai, I think the value system that's ingrained is one of tenacity, appreciation for subculture heterogeneity, and take it as it comes attitude. And that kind of shapes your perspective on the workings of the world and society at large. But if I think about the other important layer, that's nurture. And really, as you said, I've had the privilege of working in a very fragmented yet dynamic Southeast Asia environment. And what that work experience has done for me is really create one awareness and appreciation for different worldviews, and how that kind of also spills over into your personal life at a very basic level, at a very human level for me. And at the risk of oversimplifying it, basic communication for all of us as humans, whether in business or in our personal life, is just to be understood, recognized, and rewarded. I didn't have any formal cultural training as I moved across to Singapore 20 years ago. And I'm very glad that it happened that way, because it allowed me to remain open to new experiences and learning on the job. Again, no prizes or no surprises there. That's most of the learning that happens in our life anyway. And a lot of key influences play a part in shaping your perspective, as long as you keep your eyes and your ears open. Formal, informal mentors at work, your bosses, and a genuine personal desire, I think, to make those kind of meaningful connections. I mean, I learned it, someone would say the hard way. 9 out of 10 yeses in some Southeast Asian countries means a no. So how do you really tap into the process of communication? And when you are in a business like marketing, where it's a people-led business and you can't afford the risk of leaving anyone behind, it is very important to kind of focus and to keep evolving your perspective. And that's why always be learning. It's just a necessity. That is important. And in an increasingly remote working environment that is, full of volatility, uncertainty, there's so much complexity and ambiguity around us. I think you've got to leverage your unique background, and you have to continuously learn and try not to make the same mistakes, I suppose, if you want to have meaningful dialogue. So I just try and take that with me and, evolve and hopefully keep learning as you go on.
Thank you, Emil. The bit you said about nurture really resonates. Like you, I'm from India and Bombay as well. But I think what I took away from that word nurture is it's also in our formative years, the families that we grow up in, and the more multiculturalism that we are exposed to. I think that the differences that Avril talked about, you just come to take them for granted in some ways. That's part of life. Over to you, Marie-Noëlle. For a very different perspective from
thank you
Mauritius.
again. Thank you also for giving me this opportunity to be here. So I'm born and bred in Mauritius. I've done my studies in France and came back home. Home is where I wanted to be in Mauritius. And if you know a little bit about Mauritius, Mauritius is home to the world, I would say, because we have people from European, Asian, I would say India, China, and African descent. In terms of religion, you will walk around Mauritius, you'll see a church, a temple, a mosque, and a pagoda at the same time. I wear saris at home. I wear saris at, oh, you would see me in saris, you would love it. So I wear
really
saris at my Indian weddings
Love
when
to see
I'm
that.
invited. And to say also that Mauritius is a very complex society, and that of course this shapes everything. And we are a very complex society where people usually define themselves either by their ethnicity or by their religious belief. So depending on the context, I may be referred to a Catholic woman or to a Creole woman. But coming to what brings us together today, I would say that multiculturality is our DNA. It's really, it's what we live. It's our daily reality in Mauritius. We have had no other choice, and I say this positively, than learning to work and love with each and everyone around us. So that also shapes our perspective and shapes my work as a PR professional here.
Thank you, Marie-Noëlle. I think the very interesting points they're saying you could be identified either by ethnicity or by religion. But I was also thinking, because we're talking about culture and just so many aspects to culture, because the moment you said you could see me in a sari in the Indian way, I think both Emil and I went like, oh, wow, we love that. And it just instantly makes that connection, right? It's really fascinating to see that.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing your personal backgrounds. Very useful, very interesting. And with that, we go into the more work-related comments, I would say. So, Avril, a question for you. Corporate workforces are becoming incredibly diverse as people move around the world, as students move across for studies and then continue to work there. So, in what ways are you beginning to see traditional corporate communications models being challenged to adapt to this multicultural workforce? And are there any specific trends that you're observing in those?
I totally agree. I think it's really interesting that there's now a need, I think, to develop and support multicultural workforces, and that's quite a challenge to leadership at the moment in terms of how do they do that. I think the old one-size-fits-all type approach to all things in the workplace and communications and our policies and practices, I think doesn't fit anymore. And actually now we're asking leaders, or at least of the more forward-thinking companies, to create inclusive cultures. And cultures where everybody can flourish and everybody can feel that they can be themselves and that they will be recognised and rewarded. And I think our challenge has been, certainly in the UK PR industry and in many other, I know, especially corporate industries, is there tends to be a monoculture and a sort of mono type of leadership. And I think that's where there's been real challenges. We did a study at CIPR in 2020, and we found in the UK PR industry was definitely a monoculture, and that people who were from BME backgrounds, Black minority ethnic backgrounds, felt both professionally and psychologically that there were lots of barriers and challenges and pressures to fit in every day, and that it wasn't an inclusive culture. And so people had to feel they had to change themselves to fit in. And I think where we are now is that businesses now and industries realise that it's an asset to have a multicultural and diverse workforce. And so they are trying to challenge themselves to create those places. And I think there's 3 ways we're doing that in sort of broader perspective. Is one, holding leaders accountable for doing that and asking leaders to take responsibility. It's not just an HR function in terms of making teams more diverse, particularly, although whole diversity counts across the whole workforce, but for change, I think particularly for leadership teams and decision-making teams where there is more diversity, I think we are asking leaders to deliver those teams now. And I think they're being both measured and compensated in some cases on how they do against that. I think Google and Microsoft both have measures and compensation practices in relation to that, and asking leaders to take accountability for building those diverse teams and that inclusive culture that they live in, whether that's, hiring practices or how people feel they fit in, because that relates to retention. I think that's really key, and leaders are taking that on. And I might talk in a minute about a reverse mentoring scheme we do to help leaders. And then the second one I would say is that practices and policies are becoming less rigid, and style of communication and information flow within a company has become less rigid in some of the more forward-thinking companies. And there is a need now to sort of almost reset the norms of culture and what we do here and what we expect, what type of person fits in here. And I think that's come down to 2 elements there, and that one, leaders, I think, truly set culture. No matter what goes on the slide at the HR update, it is leaders who set and reinforce culture, but also the rise of the employee resource groups. And I think, they've really helped bring the voices and insights from more diverse employees up to leadership and up to the people who are creating policies and making decision making. And I think that's really helped. And I think also some leaders have taken a more informal view of information flow and been more open to being engaged with the workforce and hearing viewpoints about how the culture is going. And so I think the ERGs help that with the connectivity between leadership and different teams and workforce. And so we do see practices changing. We do see things like dress code relaxing. We do see paternity leave, something like Unilever, flexible public holidays, depending on what your religious or public holidays that you would like to observe, you can take those. Also things like lunch subsidies for junior members of staff when you're from a socioeconomic background and you're just starting out in your career, a socioeconomic background that maybe doesn't support, working on low wages, you can actually support people in a way to help them do that. And thirdly, in a sort of broad sweep, I think is the recognition that everyone is an individual. And I would add to that, which is not always recognised, and everybody is diverse in their own way. There's always something about you, we're not on cookie cutter. To Marie-Noëlle's point, there's different ways of identifying at different times. And equally, each individual will have different needs. And equally, those needs will evolve over time, depending on where you are in your life and what life stage you're at. So things like the importance of mental health fits into that, and the understanding that maybe different individuals have different needs around being neurodivergent or different pressures on them at certain times in their career. And so I think those 3 things are helping to create cultures that are better for a multicultural workforce, and are better for us all, actually, because as we say, a rising tide lifts all ships. Well, that also helps. So, when people have a flexible culture, it also helps those people that maybe aren't diverse to also reap the benefits of that as well. And to your point about trends, I think some of the trends are around that inclusive culture. The need to build it is actually supporting leaders to be able to do that and to build their cultural intelligence. And, we started a reverse mentoring scheme at the CIPR with a fantastic charity called Taylor Bennett Foundation. And that was to support senior leaders to be reverse mentored by BME PR pros, sort of mid-level in their careers. Because as a white middle class or upper middle class leader, how do you know what you don't know? And there's often also very difficult questions that are sensitive and you're not sure how to ask them. So by creating this reverse mentoring scheme, we could create an environment and relationships where people could get those questions answered, could, you know, talk about the minutiae of the office and having a cultural, inclusive culture versus what's happening in society and how are employees feeling if they're seeing race riots on the streets and things like that. So for us, that's worked really well. It's run for 4 years now. We've had over 50 leaders take part. And even in the age of Trump, we've had a 50% increase in the number of pairings we've had this year. So it shows lots of companies are still reaffirming what they're doing. And we've had companies like Google and Meta, the Welsh Parliament, the UK Parliament, the University of Cardiff, you know, really leading organisations as well as lots of leading agencies take part because their leaders want to be more sensitive and culturally intelligent about what's going on. Another trend, which is really interesting, is to talk about, you know, the ERGs as a way for leaders and employees to connect better and to understand different needs. But now some companies, including agencies, are taking the ERGs and making them a business resource. So they're using them to test concepts around client campaigns or campaigns or initiatives that need to reach certain audiences. So in fact, they've then become a direct business asset that can really help shape the work that you're doing. So that's really important. And thirdly, I'd say to my point earlier, is that whole localized view and that, you know, global companies need to be able to apply D&I differently in different parts of the world and to have that understanding that, you know, depending on where you are, it might be your ethnicity or your sex, it might be your class, it might be your accent, it might be your religion, or, you know, it depends on where you sit in the world, what really good diversity looks like. And I think leaders are getting around that. And the last thing I mentioned as a trend is lots of people talking about AI. How could we have a webinar not mention AI, right? I'll get it in there. And I know there's lots of now, we can use AI to monitor our hiring approaches, to monitor pay, to look at how we're progressing. The only thing I would say is that I think some really good tools coming out, but equally we should be careful because of the nature of how they've been built by a monoculture out on the west coast of America generally, is that they've, with the scrape of all the material across the internet, they bring their own biases with them and they bring the biases of the people who create them. So often they are not very friendly to women or people that don't have, you know, in the UK, we've done a survey. If you don't have an English name, an anglicised name, you know, the AI is more likely to throw you out if you've got an African or a Muslim name when it's going through CVs and things like that. So it's a good opportunity, but it comes with, as I would say, a health warning because I'm in health. So that's a lot, but that's my take on that one.
No, thanks so much, Avril. So much to think about, not in the least the bit about the monoculture and getting leaders to be culturally intelligent. I think that's fascinating. I think ERGs as a business asset, that's something I'm hearing for the first time. We've always worked with ERGs, but it's really interesting if that's where it's moving. Really helpful to hear all that. It's nice, this bit about cultural intelligence is a nice segue for a question I have for Marie-Noëlle, which is, you know, very often when we talk about being culturally sensitive or running campaigns that move across cultures, it's corporate communications professionals will sometimes look at just translating the messages and we think it's done, but that's just one aspect of language is just one aspect of culture, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
How do we look to genuinely localize and culturally adapt our messaging in internal, external communication so that it truly resonates with people? I think it goes back to something that Avril was talking about, raising the cultural intelligence.
Yes, totally. While preparing, thinking of this question, I was just like reflecting on any adverts or campaign I've seen here in Mauritius. And I cannot think of any campaign in Mauritius that would work if it targets only one community. In all campaigns, and I think this is what we can bring to the world, that we can bring us here, that what people from professionals from all over the world can learn from how we work here in Mauritius. We need to speak to everyone in any campaign. Our lens would mostly be about socioeconomic categories, but you will not have a campaign that will speak only to people like me or to people like you. We will have to be as diverse because our typical day in Mauritius would start, someone will be speaking Creole at breakfast, conducting business in French, praying in Hindi, and then celebrating Chinese New Year. You see what I mean? So this is our reality. So for us, it's it's, as I said, a daily reality, and this makes us, you talked of cultural intelligence, I would say cultural fluency for me. This is who we are. So I would never dream of recommending a campaign to someone and saying, okay, we're going to target only the Muslim, only the people from Hindu community. It's not going to work. We have to speak to everyone. And my take on that would be that maybe most organizations approach like multiculturalism as a risk. How do we avoid offending people? How do we avoid offending? I mean, is there risk? And then it just closes like your perspective, and you approach the project or any campaign from this perspective, as a risk, from a risk perspective. But we approach it as, in Mauritius, I would say, we approach it as an opportunity. Culture, how do I, working for any company where we will have people like me, people like you, people like Mahalakshmi, people like Avril, like of all sorts of, all those faces, all the shades of skin tone, all backgrounds, all religion. How do we speak to them? So how do we transform, I think, multiculturalism as a value creation? That for me is really really important. So we like moving from risk to creation. That being said, what we've seen over the past, like really now, I would say 10 or 15 years, mostly the use, more and more the use of Creole language in communication. Before I would say that advertisements were mostly in French and mostly in English. But now Creole language, our mother tongue, which is spoken by everyone in Mauritius, is becoming the new normal, has become the new normal in our communication landscape. So that's good. And but if, as we are here like thinking and learning, I would say that in Mauritius we will be facing, or we are facing, not a concerning a shift, but something that really, I think that organizations must take into account in Mauritius. You know, we are facing a labor shortage crisis in Mauritius, meaning that we are more and more importing labor. So we are importing labor mostly from Madagascar, mostly from India, and from countries also like Nepal. I've met Nepalis here, and this brings another dynamic to our already complex and diverse landscape. So, and I think that this is where probably Mauritian organizations should again turn to PR people to help them navigate this new landscape, because it's not only Mauritians, we have our own culture, our own way of living, but now we're bringing new addition. So we need to learn how to embrace this difference. There's a new difference that we need to embrace, because this is where also I believe that having this cultural fluency or cultural intelligence has economic dimension. Mauritius is a touristic economy. We build our economy on tourism, and tourism is service. So service, we are a client-facing like service economy, and it's important that we get to embrace. We get to embrace those people, those foreign workers that are coming, and to get them also to embrace our own culture. And this is where I think having this cultural fluency can help us build a new dynamic in Mauritius. I hope I've answered the question.
No, you have indeed, Marie-Noëlle. And like with Avril's reply earlier, I think what I'm taking away today is this fascinating trend, as Avril put it, which is taking aspects of these ERGs or diversity, EDI, to become a commercial proposition. I mean, moving to the business side, because as Avril talked about ERG as business assets, you said multiculturalism rather than a risk, but an opportunity for value creation. And I think that's a very interesting trend to follow, really. So thank you for your inputs. And over to you, Emil. Just moving away from communications more to media, which is again another very key stakeholder for all of us. When we talk about open communication across different cultures, and especially in Asian contexts, I say that because it's just so much diversity in one region. What are the subtle yet really important communication nuances that Western organizations or media often miss? And how could we get better at that?
Really interesting. I was kind of so taken by what Avril and Marie-Noëlle said. I was like, oh, great, because they are touching on topics that I was thinking, oh, how is it going to kind of connect back to my perspective on business? And it's amazing because, Avril, you talked about cultural, what did you say? You said cultural intelligence. And all along we were thinking of emotional intelligence, and I think that's so important in kind of driving business performance. And cultural intelligence, really lovely. And then Marie, you kind of built on it and talked about cultural fluency and leveraging multiculturalism in order to drive. So as I was thinking about the Asian landscape and how we run campaigns on behalf of our clients, I couldn't help but thinking, and you were talking about campaigns being run in Mauritius. Historically, they may have been run in one language aimed at it. I think if I think about some of the global, brand communications, and I'm coming at it from slightly two different lenses. One is external communication, and that's important because it really drives your reputation and your business performance. If you just look at some of the backlash that was directed at Apple at Work episode, where Thailand in Southeast Asia was actually depicted as a backward, underdeveloped country. If you look at Campaign Asia and all the conversation around it, that work and the campaign from a global brand, which has multiculturalism kind of built into the way the brand is built, was considered tone deaf in appreciating cultural sensitivity. So again, of course, the apology followed after the fact and the video was removed and no major sales impact. The point is that if there was enough cultural intelligence and if you truly leverage some of the testing of these campaigns by leveraging the multiculturalism and taking into account the sensitivity of the market where you are planning to release, one ought not to be surprised with how that went down. I think the takeaway there is that I think good human sensitive copy cannot be replaced by technology. And all of this, I think we all know in business that 76% of your consumers only align with brands that are aligned with their core values. And in a world of hyper-personalization, we are automatically recognizing that every individual consumer and their path to purchase, their modality of engaging with brands is completely different. And in a time when you have AI, again, I couldn't resist the opportunity to miss. This is probably the downside of letting that kind of human aspect to external communications come in, in the way of really better decisions. On the other side, and I often say this, and I don't know, I might be alone in thinking that, but oftentimes in communication agencies, and I'm sure other companies as well, by the way, struggle most with internal communications, because if you take a step back and look at your organogram, there will be several aspects of multiculturalism, and you bring different aspects of, as the other panelists have kind of talked about, different aspects of your cultural background that you bring at any given time. And one thing that I wanted to touch on is what I have observed and I have learned is that there is such a pertinent relationship with respect to the psychological safety that different cultures perceive within an organization. And it not only happens at various levels. I think, Avril, you talked about a lot of the reverse mentoring for senior leaders by the BME groups. I think fantastic idea. At the same time, how do we encourage more people from different cultures to be able to express their point of view? Let's say if communicating in English in a global organization was not their first language. Because how then it leads to better business decisions. I think that is absolutely key. And again, there's another statistic out here that we always know. Harvard Business Review continuously says that 87% of the time, if the teams are diverse, they end up making better business decisions. Now, that is a great statistic. It also is known to drive double-digit higher innovation revenues if you have higher, that correspond to higher diversity levels within organizations. So I do think that it is important to kind of be aware, second, harness, and then build a governance around this cultural quotient that takes care or encompasses the various multiculturalism elements that exist within an organization. A simple example, a lot of companies practice receiving employee feedback, right? It's common. Does the existence of a form really mean that you're listening and adjusting the tone of communication? If you don't listen, if your ears are not to the ground, how do you make that shift? And something that we did in our organization maybe 2.5 years ago was leveraging AI to actually allow our people below managers, basically you could be anyone, but predominantly it was to give the junior employees where English was not their first language to provide feedback to us openly and anonymously in their local language. We then worked together as a leadership team to translate those into micro and macro actions, and we shared it very openly in terms of the progress we had made, whether we were moving the needle. And I can tell you sitting here that this directly improved and had a positive knock-on effect on our net promoter scores within the organization. And over a period of time, you do see the effect on business and your client relationship index. So I think this is to me, this is a really good example of how organizations that are global, and I'm avoiding the term Western because no organization is truly belonging to either East or the West. We are all global organizations with, again, a very multicultural character. Leveraging tech here was the right thing to do to ultimately evoke a better business outcome. But ultimately, I mean, to the last point that you raised, Anjali, how can we all get better at understanding them? I think the more the leadership is visible and to a certain extent vulnerable, and I think I can't remember if Marie said it or Avril said it, you don't know what you don't know. And I have no qualms, and so do a lot of our leadership team. We have no qualms at saying, at being vulnerable. I don't know. Can you help me understand? And let's not pretend to be omniscient because that doesn't exist. And that helps to keep these cultural misses at a minimal, and rather than only focus on mitigation, as Marie so rightly pointed out, I think how do you turn and help evolve the cultural fabric, the cultural quotient of the organization? I think those would be points that I would share.
Thank you, Emil. And that, I mean, it's fantastic to hear you echo the commercial aspects. That seems to be a thread that seems to be coming through, along with the fact that we really need to work with senior management and employees in terms of developing cultural fluency or cultural intelligence. Marie-Noëlle, for you, a question about, just like Avril said, no webinar, no discussion is complete without AI. It's not complete without social media either, and misinformation or disinformation. And how do we promote accurate, inclusive narratives at a time when misinformation and disinformation is so rampant and so easy and so quick to spread?
That's a very good question. We are currently, I would say, in Mauritius, facing like sort of social crisis because of certain political decisions following the budget measures here. And we are coming from elections that we had last year, last November, where social media and AI played a large role. So yeah, we as communicators and as public relations professionals, we have to learn to navigate this landscape. And on my view is that I strongly believe that organizations that can weather any social media storm linked to any emotions, we won't say cultural, we say community issues. We don't, in emotions, we don't say culture, we say community in French, we say community. And or religion, as I said. Any organization who can weather the storm are organizations who understand that they do not operate in silo, that that their operations, where they are, what they do, they have to do a proper, for me, stakeholder mapping and be able to have build relationship with all the communities around them. For me, that's important. That's important. And for me, as we talked of cultural fluency, I said that. For me, organizations that can weather those storms are those who are really ingrained in the community where they operate, where they have people, and where they are also diverse. In this case, I would say diverse in the sense that their workforce comes from around where they are based, and the workforce is diverse. And but I would say I'm not sure I am able to answer this question properly, because we are learning right now to navigate this new landscape with AI. I was sharing earlier about right now we had social protests on Saturday, and since Saturday there's a flurry of AI generated Google VO3 videos flooding social media right now, flooding social media. On my side, what I do when there are any social crisis on social media, I always make it a point to go to be able to follow what on Facebook, or mostly on Facebook. Mauritius is still big in Facebook. We have to understand here. Mauritius, really, Facebook is still very, very prominent here. We do have certain groups or community groups that I join to understand what's happening in their community. How are they perceiving certain policies, certain action? So this, I'm like someone's, I think April said, or Mahalakshmi said, we need to be open. It's always, for me, when there's this type of social crisis, to remain open and to learn and to listen to what other people are saying on the social media and see where they are coming from. What besides, the immersion and, we all love each other, what is the background and what are their value framework that makes them think or have some perception. So for me, it's really about remaining open and also learning about all your stakeholders around your organization.
Thank you, Marie-Noëlle. Very valid. And when you said that organizations that weather the storm, your comments brought me back to what Avril said earlier, which is there's no such thing as global, but just different kinds of local. So it was a nice echo of what she had just said. Avril, last but one question for you. There's so much done on gender diversity and what gender diversity brings to organizations. But do you think that, in terms of organizational performance, increased profitability, retention, do you think cultural diversity has similar benefits? I know they've not been studied as much, but do you believe that the cultural diversity would bring similar benefits?
Well, the quick answer is yes, which is good news. And actually, ML just brought up the Harvard Business Review, which I'd sort of had on my list as well, which said, you know, diverse organizations, 80% better at making decisions, better at innovation, more objective. But also there was the McKinsey report in 2020, which is Diversity Wins, and that looked at 1,000 plus companies in 15 countries. And they found that, I'm going to get my figure right now, companies in the top quartile for executive ethnic diversity were 36% more likely to outperform those on profitability than those in the lowest quartile. And that compares with 25% for gender diversity. So actually, if anything, there seems to be a stronger correlation with ethnic diversity and better performance than gender. But the best companies are going to do both, right? Because in that way, you can intersectionally even boost your performance even more. But it does show that these things are linked with profitability, innovation, better decision making, global competitiveness. And we are getting the studies now to show that and to show that it works. And as I mentioned earlier, particularly with leadership and decision making teams being ethnically diverse, but also there are studies showing, you know, the whole of the workforce being more culturally diverse makes a difference as well. So absolutely the numbers are stacking up. And you know, we've talked a lot about, you know, the ERGs being business assets and performance. I mean, it's two sides of the same coin. So on one side, we definitely want better financial performance because that encourages leadership to keep investing in it and seeing it as valuable. And the other side, the other value is for individuals to feel valued and to stay, you know, in the talent war, talking about shortage of talent, Marie-Noëlle was mentioning, you know, you want to retain the talent you find, you want to make better products and relate to the communities you serve. And so that's another type of value that's really important, but absolutely, you know, profitability and innovation is linked to both multicultural diversity and gender diversity. And you should do both if you want to maximize your chances of succeeding in a difficult world.
Fantastic, great to all but close our discussion today on that very, very positive note. And so one last question for each one of you. For our listeners, for me, what is the one tip that you'd share that could help us, that we could put into action to raise our cultural quotient or our cultural intelligence, as we say? Any one of you could go first.
It's not all at once.
Avril,
did you want to go first? Yeah, go for it.
Well, actually, I'm just going to echo Marie-Noëlle anyway. It's which is to be open, but to be self-aware. We're all human. None of us are perfect. We've all got biases because that's what being human is about. But to be self-aware, to seek information from outside your bubble, you know, look outside what's normal for you, follow people who maybe you don't agree with politically or you don't have the same background, and feel that, which also came up in our chats from everybody, you know, feel you can ask the question. If the question comes from a good place, most people don't mind being asked. You know, the intention that makes the difference. You can ask the questions around cultural sensitive things or what to do in the office. Most people welcome. They'd rather you asked than didn't ask and they're not being listened to and, you know, their views aren't considered.
And I would echo what Avril is saying. Thinking about the question, I would be a bit naive or maybe like, not cliche, but why we do PR is because we love, I think, building relationship. For me, the fundamental answer for this question is to go back to a place of love, of meeting the other person, of learning to love the other person. I say love because it's very important, because in this like highly tense world with so many things going on, we even haven't touched on what I think is happening around the world, the war on women's rights that's happening around the world. We need to go back to a place of love, to a place where we are genuinely interested in the other, the one that's in front of me. As you say, we shut down our biases and we say, how can I meet you halfway? And it's really about building relationship. I would say, go and meet as many people as different as you. Do not sit in the office. Go and meet. If I were to say for Mauritius quickly, as I said, we are diverse, etc. I was just thinking that one of our best asset in Mauritius is that we are good networkers. We know how to build relationships. We know how to blend into diverse. We know how to blend in teams. We know how to talk to people. And this is what we have to build. And this is, I would say, try to build relationship and try to go and meet as many people as possible.
I think really great points from both. I think for me, I would say anything with respect to raising or enhancing a cultural quotient or any change or evolution for that matter, it starts with you, with me. And I think creating that time to reflect so that you don't know what you don't know, your blinders, active listening, and learning to connect. I think I often remind myself I have to use my ears and my mouth in the correct ratio in which God has endowed us with, and learning to connect dots, even if, maybe not even if, especially if they bring you discomfort, because I think a little bit of discomfort encourages you to be more open, encourages you to inquire and be curious a little bit more. And eventually that discomfort will pave the path for change and better learning. So I think even in some of the conversations in the office with my colleagues, I always tell them the same thing. I think we all have to be ready for the bit of discomfort, which means change is coming. And for that change to be positive, it will not come without a certain level of uneasiness, so to speak. So that would be my 2 cents.
Well, thank you all for those tips. And I think it's one of the key takeaways from those tips is also that we should do a lot more with the cultural lens on what we do naturally as communicators, networking, listening, reaching out to people, trying to understand messaging. I think it comes naturally to us, but just doing it with a lens that's a multicultural lens. We have time for just one question, but I would like one of you to take it, perhaps Avril, but the others could weigh in too. And Sarah Black has asked, I would love to know what cultural intelligence means to the panelists. Just a quick definition would be really valuable.
Why don't I do a quick one, then everybody can get a quick word in too. And I don't know, I can Google it now and I'm sure there's a really nice definition. But what I would say is it's just a sensitivity that not everybody is like you and not everybody is going to read and perceive and understand things in the same way you would. Just as we're sensitive emotionally to what's going on in people's lives and what's happening, so we should be sensitive that not everybody is like us.
Well said.
I would agree. I think the only thing I would add to that is emotional intelligence has 2 parts. One is awareness and then acting on that awareness and therefore regulating. So I think if you apply that same thing to cultural intelligence, and I was about to quickly Google it as well, what does, is there an index on it? Like, I think it's one is awareness, because you have to know where to start. And that's a big part of knowing, and then acting on your knowledge, and the two kind of combine together defines your level of cultural intelligence.
And also remember that we are, after all, multidimensional. We are multidimensional, so we are not singular, but we are multidimensional, and this is what for me would amount to an answer to what is cultural intelligence, would be to remember that we come from multi-dimension, that we're not a singular, and we have to take into account those different dimensions as a person or during a campaign.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. And we are very nearly, with just 2 minutes to go at the end of our session. I want to say a big thank you for all of you, to all of you, because this was a bit at short notice, but all of you made the time. It has been a fantastic discussion. I didn't know what to expect when I put those questions together, but so many insights, so many interesting trends. And I think, I mean, I keep saying it again and again, but I think the biggest thing I'm taking away is how this aspect of diversity is merging with the commercial and the business aspects. And it's something that I would definitely like to explore more, read up about it a little more, or see what other companies here in India are doing as well. So many thanks, and for sharing so generously. It's been fascinating to get to know each one of you. And lastly, before I close, I would be completely amiss if I did not thank my fellow committee members, without whom it's impossible to put this webinar together. So a big thank you if you're listening now, or you'll find an email in your box at the end of the session. But thanks once again for being with us.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for hosting.
Oh,
Thank you so much.
lovely session. Thanks, Anjali.
Thanks everyone.
Thank you.
Catch up soon. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.